Good morning, guys. You're here on site in Riverside Park with Megan Stewart, the museum educator for the Kamloops Museum and Archives. Now, before we begin our museum minute today, I would like to just take a moment to acknowledge that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc First Nation. Now, of course, behind me you can see the Thompson River. It is starting to flood. It is flooded a piece of the Rivers Trail here, which is now closed. So today I would like to talk to you about our last two major floods, one in 1948 and one in 1972. In both these cases, the river breached its banks, breached some of the dikes that were put up as well. But our story actually begins almost 50 million years ago when the Kamloops Valley was being formed by ancient rivers. Of course, we know that there were rivers and lakes in this area, best preserved at the Maccabee fossil beds. Then the rivers froze up during the Ice Age. The ice sheets moved down, of course, further etching out the valley. And eventually, as that ice recedes, we get the Thompson Rivers as we know them today. Now, in 1948, it was really interesting looking back through some of the newspaper reports of the flooding. I think the most interesting thing that came out of that for me was looking at the dikes being built. So 15,000 yards of soil were moved over the course of a few days using bulldozers and a crew of 500 volunteers. And the papers note that the dikes run from William Brennan's place over on Mackenzie Road to Rostich's on Royal Avenue. So that gives you a sense of the sense of community that Kamloops had in 1948, such that the newspaper could direct things and offer directions to people based on where other folks in town were living. And that, I think, is the most important thread that we see running through all of these large-scale events. Flooding, of course, the forest fires, and of course what's happening now with COVID-19. I think the community support that we see in Kamloops is really amazing. Now, 1972, the flood happens a little later. So 1948, the height of the flooding happens in early June. In 1972, the height of the flooding happens about mid-month. And of course, in 1972, we see the breach of the dikes out at Oak Hills on West Side Road. And because those dikes were breached, we see water that gets to be up to 7 feet deep. And again, the really amazing thing that you see in the papers is this community response. So the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, of course, are stepping up as aid organizations. And we also see community response. So people offering up space for people to move their trailers, people offering up storage space for people to store the goods that they might have in their homes. On June 14th of 1972, the local high school, the residential school, and the Air Cadet Training School all record record absenteeism because students are leaving school in order to help with the dikes and dike preparation. We also see in the radio and in the newspapers calls for volunteers. So most of this work is being carried out by volunteers, including overnight shifts patrolling the dikes. So again, just looking at that community response and keeping that in mind as we move into the summer here. Thank you so much for joining me for a Museum Minute. See you next time.